When two security officers attempted to escort a black Marine out of his son's graduation, no one anticipated 6 Navy SEALs would quietly rise from the crowd and freeze the entire room without uttering a single word. Solomon Dryden didn't expect to be recognized when he pulled into the rear parking lot of Elmridge High. The school looked like countless others in small Texas towns. Faded red brick, flags waving above the entrance, students hanging out by the gym door. The place was already bustling. Parents in collared shirts, siblings carrying handmade signs, an elderly woman leaning on a walker. It was all there. He parked his Dodge Charger near a chain-link fence and stepped out, smoothing the creases of his dark blue Marine dress uniform. His boots gleamed like glass, not to show off, but because he simply didn't know how to do anything halfway. He glanced around, his posture upright, deliberate. His calm face held the quiet depth of someone who had lived through many chapters. He had driven 8 hours from Temple just to be here for his son's high school graduation. Flying would have been quicker, but the Charger had been his late wife's favorite car. Even 2 years after she passed, it made him feel closer to her when he drove. Opening the glove box, he pulled out a worn photograph, his wife cradling a baby Tyron. The edges were frayed, one corner torn. He slipped it into his jacket's inside pocket. "I promise you," he murmured, "I wouldn't miss this." He walked to the school entrance with intention, each step weighted with meaning. Something swelled in his chest, something he couldn't name. Somewhere between pride and pain. Inside, the gymnasium was packed. Folding chairs covered the floor, and the bleachers overflowed with people. The air was a mix of popcorn and floor cleaner. It was loud, buzzing with life. A volunteer at the door, a short man with a headset and clipboard, checked his printed ticket, gave a nod, and pointed to the 3rd row on the left. "You're all set. Family seating right up front." "Thanks," Solomon said, voice calm and level. He moved down the aisle, passing groups of families. Some people stared, double-taked at the uniform, then quickly looked away. One woman smiled faintly before leaning over to whisper to the man beside her. Solomon didn't react. He had been tall, black, and in uniform long enough to recognize which looks mattered and which didn't. He found his seat and eased into the plastic chair. It wobbled slightly. He adjusted it without complaint. Ahead, the stage was decorated with banners, Class of 2024 in bold silver letters. A few school board officials stood near the podium reviewing notes. Solomon scanned the student rows at the far end of the gym. Tyron was among them, tall, slim, with his mother's eyes. 18 years gone in a blink. He remembered holding him for the first time the night he was born, still in uniform, dirt under his nails, having just flown in from Okinawa on a 4-day leave. And now, here they were. He sat quietly, hardly blinking, absorbing everything. Behind him, people continued to arrive. Chairs scraped, programs rustled, someone laughed too loudly, and a man cursed under his breath after dropping his coffee. None of it reached Solomon. His focus narrowed to the stage, the students, and the photo resting against his chest. The music started, pomp and circumstance, and the crowd rose. Some students looked nervous, others smiled brightly. Solomon stood as well, shoulders squared, arms at his sides. The national anthem followed. Hands went to hearts. Solomon didn't move. He didn't have to. His entire bearing was a salute. He thought of his wife again, how she would have cried through the entire ceremony, how she would have fussed with Tyron's tie repeatedly before letting him out the door. His eyes stayed forward as the anthem's final note faded. 2 men in uniform appeared at the side of the gym and headed directly toward him. They weren't police. Their badges read Harlan Security Services, and their uniforms consisted of black polo shirts tucked into cargo pants. Radios and earpieces marked them as private security. Neither appeared older than 30. One was stocky with a shaved head and tight expression. The other was tall, thin, and lazily chewing gum. Solomon saw them coming but didn't react. His military training had taught him that stillness can speak louder than movement. He kept his gaze forward, hands resting loosely on his thighs. The shorter guard leaned in close. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with us," he said in a quiet tone. Solomon turned his head slowly. "Is there an issue?" The taller one stepped in. Yeah, this area is reserved for graduating families. Solomon blinked, then calmly reached into his jacket and pulled out the printed ticket, the same one he'd shown earlier. This is my seat. Third row, left side. Family section. The shorter guard didn't even glance at the ticket. We were told it's full. I found it full when I sat down too, Solomon said, unmoving. Who exactly gave you that order? The taller guard looked uneasy. He hadn't expected resistance wrapped in calm. Look, no big deal. We've got some open seats in the back. Let's not make this something it doesn't need to be. Solomon's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with quiet precision. I drove 8 hours to watch my son cross that stage. I'll be staying in this seat. Around them, heads began to turn. A woman nudged her husband. Someone angled their phone discreetly, maybe recording. The shorter guard straightened and scanned the crowd. Sir, I'm asking again. You can ask all you like, Solomon cut in, his voice low and firm. I'm not moving. The taller one clicked his tongue. Might be more comfortable in the back, that's all we're saying. And there it was. Solomon turned to face him fully. That phrase wasn't about seating. It was about something older, subtler, something he'd encountered on front porches, in waiting rooms, board meetings, even on base. Hidden just beneath a smile. Whispered behind politeness. He didn't reply. The mood in the gym shifted. The kind of shift that happens when a line has clearly been crossed. The short guard felt it too. He reached for his radio and spoke into it softly, not breaking eye contact. Solomon stayed put. Eyes forward. The conversation to him was over. The woman next to him, older, pale, leaned in and whispered, "Don't let them push you around." He gave her a single nod. No words. He wasn't trying to cause trouble. He just wanted to see his son graduate like any other dad. But the guards weren't finished. "Take it up at the school office if you've got a complaint," the tall one said. "We're just following orders." Solomon turned his head once more. "What's your name, son?" The guard hesitated. "It's Officer Malley." "Not officer," Solomon corrected him. "You're private security." The other guard stepped forward. "That's enough. If you won't stand, then—" He didn't finish. Because just then the far gym door opened and 6 men entered. No uniforms, no insignias, just upright postures, squared shoulders, and faces that told of battles fought, seen and unseen. They didn't walk in as a unit. They spread out casually, taking separate positions, but anyone watching closely would recognize their cohesion. The way they scanned the room, their silent confidence, the alert stillness in how they sat. Solomon didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He knew who they were. But the guards didn't. Not yet. And they were about to. Solomon kept his focus on the stage. His jaw stayed still. But inside something shifted. Not rage. Not even frustration. Just that quiet internal switch, a mode built from years of discipline, pressure, and survival. The guards didn't move. They lingered. But their hovering wasn't about protection. It was about authority. A reminder of control. What they hadn't realized was they no longer had it. Solomon had spent years in places where power meant survival, life or death, not some gymnasium filled with folding chairs and a cheap sound system. A student's name echoed from the stage, and the audience clapped politely. But no one nearby was really paying attention to the ceremony anymore. Not really. They were focused on the confrontation unfolding, pretending not to be. The taller security guard, Malley, shifted his footing again. He leaned in closer this time, his voice low. "I'm trying to help you here, all right? This doesn't have to turn into something." Solomon's eyes flicked toward him. "You don't have that kind of help to give." Malley hesitated, pulling back slightly, clearly reconsidering his next step. But the shorter guard, Garvin, according to the badge on his chest, was less patient. He didn't take being challenged well. His hand hovered near his radio again. A few rows back, a man stood up slowly. No one noticed right away. He didn't say anything, just crossed his arms and locked his eyes on the situation. Clean-shaven, solid build, eyes alert. He took a seat near the aisle, never breaking his gaze. Then another man stood across the gym. Same posture, Calm. Intentional. Then a third. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Solomon knew them all. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. His instincts didn't require confirmation. These were men he had led through gunfire, mud, and silence darker than most people could comprehend. Garvin leaned down again, his voice holding something new, a mix of frustration and threat. You're turning this into an issue. Solomon slowly turned his head deliberately. No, you're the one not listening. Garvin's fingers twitched toward his radio again, but before he could say a word, a voice cut through the tension, calm even from about 10 feet away. Is there a reason this man's being harassed? The tone was firm, quiet, commanding. Not loud enough to demand attention, just low enough to silence the room. A man stood in the center aisle, tall, with a salt and pepper beard, wearing a fitted black coat over a gray shirt. His name was Creed Marston. Solomon had dragged him out of wreckage in Kandahar, pulling him 200 yards through a sandstorm of bullets. Garvin looked up, caught off guard. Who are you? Creed didn't respond. He took one step forward. I asked you a question. Malley raised a hand. Sir, we've got this under control. No, Creed said, sharper now. You don't. A man stood from the far bleachers, then another. There were 4 of them now. Solomon remained still, silent. The left side of the gym was watching openly. A boy pointed. A teacher waved her hand, trying to guide attention back to the stage. But no one cared about diplomas anymore. Creed stepped forward again. You're embarrassing yourselves, and you're seconds from making it worse. Garvin looked at Malley, who was visibly losing confidence. It was clear they hadn't expected anyone to step in, especially not like this. I don't care what your instructions were, Creed said. You don't lay a hand on him. You don't tell him to move, and you don't ask again. The silence that followed wasn't born of fear. It came from respect. A deep, quiet respect that slowly rippled across the room as people caught on to what was really happening. Solomon looked up at Creed. Just a slight nod. Not gratitude. Not permission. Just acknowledgement. Creed's expression softened briefly. Then he returned to his seat, arms crossed. But the tension hadn't broken. Not yet. Everyone was waiting to see what the guards would do next. The gym, the stage, the decorations, the faces, all blurred into the background of Solomon's mind. His body sat in that folding chair, but his memory pulled him back. 15 years. Kandahar. Afternoon sun in the Afghan desert didn't set gently. It collapsed, turning sand into rust, air into steel. Back then, Solomon was a gunnery sergeant. He had just finished briefing his unit when it all unraveled. A roadside IED detonated beneath their convoy, flipping the lead Humvee like a toy. Metal and dirt rained down. Then, gunfire. Not random, coordinated. He didn't think. Just move. Ducked behind a half-destroyed doorframe, eyes scanning the chaos. Smoke blurred the valley, but he saw them, 6 men pinned behind wreckage. One was crawling, dragging someone else. Creed Marston, barely 3 months deployed, already shot through the thigh. Solomon ran. No hesitation. No call for backup. Just sprinted across open ground under fire, slid behind a busted axle. Creed looked up, blood on his face, gasping. You're bleeding, he said. You noticed, Solomon replied. He grabbed the straps of the wounded man, Enrique Soto, and started dragging. Creed pushed from behind, wincing. Where's Divas? Solomon shouted. Creed pointed weakly. Left side, under the hood. Solomon saw him. A young SEAL, leg crushed beneath an engine block, screaming for help, too hurt to move. You stay low, Solomon told Creed. Move when I move. Creed nodded. That's when he understood what real leadership looked like. Solomon dashed again. Gravel. Bone. Didn't matter. Drop next to Divas. Crouch. Grab the mangled hood. Gunny, don't, Divas yelled. I'm fine. You're not staying here, Solomon growled. He dug in, shoulders straining. Ribs aching. The metal groaned, then lifted just enough for Divas to slide free. They hit the ground together, crawling to the ridge. Creed returned with Soto. 2 more followed, Lim and Horton, rifles ready, faces black with soot. When the shooting stopped, there was no victory cry. Just silence and breathing. All 6 made it out. Solomon was the last to leave, staying in position until the dust cleared and the medevac arrived. He didn't say much afterward, but no one forgot. And after that day, if Solomon needed something anywhere, anytime, they would show up. No questions. Back in the gym, Creed watched the guards beside Solomon. He wasn't thinking about war. He was thinking about loyalty. The man who saved him was now being hassled for attending his son's graduation. His hands clenched. Another SEAL, Javier Meeks, entered quietly and sat 4 rows back. Then Zachary Wells appeared, standing along the right wall. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Solomon glanced toward the back, briefly, made eye contact with Meeks. That was enough. The guards hadn't understood what those looks meant, not yet, but they were about to. The ceremony continued technically. Names were still being read. Families clapped, some too loud, trying to mask the heavy atmosphere. But attention had shifted. Eyes kept drifting to the 3rd row on the left, where Solomon Drayton sat like a statue, and 2 guards looked increasingly unsure. Garvin glanced toward the stage, where a school official nervously gestured toward them. She mouthed something, a warning, but he shook his head. He wasn't backing down. His pride had taken over. Mally shifted again, grinding his gum harder, now visibly uneasy. "Sir," Garvin said louder, "this is your final warning." Solomon didn't move. To do what? Garvin stepped in close, so near his belt brushed Solomon's knee. "To stop making this a thing. We don't want trouble. Just move to the back." Solomon turned to him, meeting his eyes. "You're the only one making it a thing." Garvin's nostrils flared. Then he said it. "You think wearing that uniform makes you better than everyone else? This is a high school, not your damn base." The room froze. A girl stopped fidgeting. A father held his camera still, finger frozen mid-zoom. Even Mally stepped back slightly. The words had landed heavier than expected. Solomon didn't flinch. He inhaled, not to steady himself, but to stay present. "You should walk away," he said. Garvin didn't move. Instead, his hand dropped toward his belt, not on a weapon, but close enough to feel dangerous. That's when Creed stood. He didn't raise his voice, didn't puff up his chest. He simply moved into the aisle, slow and deliberate, like whatever this was had now involved him. The gym wasn't silent, but it was close. Creed's voice cut through, steady. "If you lay a hand on him, you'll deal with me." Garvin turned, eyes narrowed. "And who the hell are you?" Creed stepped in again. "The guy telling you this ends now." A school board member caught on, whispered something to the principal. One of the assistant principals stood, heading toward the back of the gym, likely speaking into the walkie on her hip. The staff had finally realized this wasn't going to settle quietly. Other SEALs began to rise from their seats. No command, no signal, just instinct. 6 in total, spread across the gym, now standing. No shifting, no nervous movements. Their presence was heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Creed took one more step forward. "You've got 2 options, walk away or see where this goes, and you won't like it." Finally, another voice broke through, Mally. "Let's just cool off, man." Still, Garvin hesitated. Then Solomon spoke, not to Garvin, but to Creed. "Don't waste your breath. He's already decided." Creed didn't smirk. His voice dropped one final time. "Don't confuse silence with weakness." Garvin finally backed down, not far, but far enough. His hand fell from his belt. His face flushed with frustration, but he knew he was outnumbered and outmatched. The principal appeared at the aisle, speaking softly but firmly to the security staff. Whatever she said worked. The 2 men turned and walked toward the exit, eyes down, avoiding contact. Solomon exhaled, slow and controlled. Creed returned to his seat without a word. The SEALs remained standing, the moment still taut in the air. And Tyron Drayson had seen it all. From the student lineup, fists clenched by his sides, he watched. Tyron stood among his graduating class between a girl with bright braids and a boy constantly adjusting his gown. They were trying to enjoy the ceremony, nervous smiles, name cards, small jokes, like everything was normal. But Tyron knew better. From the moment the anthem ended, he'd seen the two guards heading toward his father. At first, he thought maybe they were helping someone find a seat, but a voice deep inside told him this wasn't routine. Then he saw how his dad sat, composed, locked in, still. Tyron knew that look. He'd seen it when he came home crying at 12, after a classmate said something cruel. His father didn't yell then either. He just sat there, solid, unbending, steel. Tyron kept watching, straining to read lips he couldn't hear. But body language said enough. Guards too close, his father unmoving. And then someone stood. Tall, dark coat. Not just a parent. Tyron could tell. This man knew his father. The way he moved, placed himself between the guard and Solomon's row. It was protection, not drama. Then another man rose, and another. Quiet but powerful. It felt like the whole gym shifted. Tyron's heart raced, not from fear, but something else. Pride. Fire. He'd heard bits of his father's military past, never in full. No horror stories. Just glimpses, cards from old buddies, scars with untold stories, a sealed box in the garage marked Kandahar. He never knew names or faces. Until now. Now they were here, standing, without needing a reason other than Solomon. Tyron blinked hard, fighting the burn behind his eyes. Not now. Not here. The ceremony picked back up, clapping slowly returning. But the room had changed. It wasn't about banners anymore. It was about respect. An assistant principal tapped his shoulder, said something Tyron didn't catch. He nodded anyway. A student nearby leaned in. "That's your dad?" Tyron didn't reply. He didn't need to. Everyone had seen. Now everyone understood who Solomon Drayson really was. Across the gym, Creed remained standing. He wasn't looking for acknowledgement. He was still watching Solomon, who sat calm, hands on his lap, eyes on the stage like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The other SEALs didn't sit either. Not aggressive, just present. Their silence said more than 100 speeches. Parents started clapping louder again. Not just for their kids, but for what had just taken place. The gym wasn't just a room anymore, it was alive, stirred by injustice, held steady by honor. Solomon didn't move. Not bitter, not proud, just there. A father watching his son become something more. But the moment that would shift everything hadn't arrived yet. When Tyron's name was called, no one would be able to pretend anymore. The line moved. Some students whispered, laughed, adjusted their caps. But Tyron wasn't there anymore. His mind was still on his father, sitting alone, yet centered. The chair might as well have been made for him. That stillness, that calm, wasn't just personality. It was power. And those men, those warriors who rose for him, they didn't need words. They didn't need permission. For the first time, Tyron realized he'd never understood the full weight his dad carried. Sure, there were medals, a folded flag, a quiet wooden box on a shelf. But those didn't speak. Today, they walked. Today, they stood. 3 names from the stage. Tyron wiped his palms, tried to breathe deeper. The girl in front turned and smiled nervously. "You ready?" He smiled back. "More than you know." He stepped forward. On the other side of the gym, Solomon leaned slightly in, eyes still locked on the stage. He didn't clap for everyone. Not to be rude, but because he was waiting for one name. The boy in the black gown wearing red and white cords. The boy who looked like his mother when he smiled. One name, then another. Then the announcer paused, cleared her throat. Tyron Drayson. The name echoed. Half a second of stillness. Then applause. Not wild, not scattered, focused, rhythmic, meaningful. The 6 seals clapped in unison. No salute, but it felt like one. A statement. We see you. We see him. We honor you both. Tyron crossed the stage, steps even head high. His heart pounded, not from nerves, but from pride. Not just in himself, but in the legacy he carried. He took his diploma, shook hands, turned to the crowd, searched, found him. Solomon didn't wave, didn't stand. He just gave his son the smallest, most powerful smile of the day. The applause hadn't faded yet. Parents who had been silent through the entire ceremony were now clapping enthusiastically. Some stood. A few brushed away tears, uncertain exactly why, but sensing they just witnessed something meaningful. Solomon leaned back in his seat, letting the moment soak in. He wasn't the type to cry in front of others, but inside, something gave way. It wasn't sorrow or hurt, just a kind of release that comes when a chapter feels closed, even if life keeps moving. Names continued to be called, but the atmosphere had shifted. Every student crossing the stage after that did so in the wake of what had just happened. Not because it was flashy or viral, but because it was genuine. But the story didn't wrap with applause. When father and son reunited outside the gym, it was more than a proud embrace. It was a quiet transfer of something deeper. The final name had been read about 20 minutes later. The crowd rose as the graduates tossed their caps, shouted in relief, and hugged like it had been years since they'd seen each other. Phones went up, cameras clicked, and balloons floated overhead as students filtered out through the gym's rear doors. Solomon stayed seated at first, still letting the celebration wash over him. The music, the laughter, the shimmer of red and silver gowns swirling past. He watched Taryn disappear into the hall with his friends. A teacher gave him a high five. Another pulled him into a side hug. Amid the chaos, Taryn turned just once and glanced back. Solomon caught it. A fleeting look, but one that held everything. "Did you see me?" And Solomon's expression answered every second. As the gym emptied and voices echoed off the walls, Solomon stood slowly, stretching out the stiffness in his legs. Creed approached his families filed out with flowers and balloons. He didn't speak at first, just looked at Solomon, then toward the exit. "You good?" Creed finally asked. Solomon gave a nod. "I've seen worse." Creed offered a faint smile. "Yeah, doesn't mean it should have gone down like that." "No," Solomon agreed. "It shouldn't have." Another SEAL, Javier Meeks, came over. "We tried to stay low-key, but when that guy reached near his waist, Solomon raised a calming hand. You did what needed doing. That's enough." The 3 men stood in silence for a moment, letting the energy drain from the gym. "I want to see my son," Solomon finally said. Outside, the sunlight cut sharp shadows across the pavement. Students clustered together for group photos, tossed their caps again, and called out to loved ones. Turin stood near the flagpole, his gown partly unzipped, diploma folder in one hand and phone in the other. When he saw his father, he stopped, mid-sentence. The crowd around him seemed to blur. They met halfway. "You all right?" Turin asked. Solomon nodded. "You?" "Yeah," Turin replied, glancing down. "They tried to move you." "I know." Turin clenched his jaw. "I was ready to walk. I swear I was 2 seconds from saying something." Solomon placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "And that's why you didn't." Turin looked up, confused. "Why?" "Because you trusted I could handle it. And you owned your moment. You didn't let them steal it." Turin took a slow breath. Who were those guys who stood up? Solomon looked toward the edge of the crowd. The 6 SEALs were nearby, speaking quietly, keeping a watchful eye. "They're brothers. Men I bled with. Men who understand loyalty," Solomon said. "Men who remember." Taryn nodded. "That hit hard." "It was meant to," Solomon said. "Sometimes silence makes the biggest noise, and standing up without a word can speak louder than any speech." They stood in that moment, grounded in something unspoken. Taryn smiled. "So, you gonna tell me the war stories now?" Solomon chuckled. "Some of them. You're old enough now for the real stuff. They stood shoulder to shoulder, not just father and son anymore, but two men connected by something deeper than blood. Across the lot, Creed lifted a hand, not a wave, just a sign of respect. Taryn returned it without hesitation. The sun kept rising, but time had shifted for the Draytons. One final moment remained. By the time they walked back to the car, the crowd had mostly gone. A few families lingered, still laughing, packing up folding chairs and gifts. The energy had softened with an evening light. Solomon unlocked the Charger, the same car his wife used to drive to school meetings and family trips. Tyrion paused at the passenger side, brushing his fingers across a scratch near the handle. "She would have been the loudest one today," he said softly. "She would have made you retake every photo till you got the perfect smile," Solomon replied, grinning. They climbed in and shut the doors. The warmth inside the car wrapped around them like a shell. Tyrion turned to his father. "I gotta ask, why didn't you say anything to those guards? You just sat there." Solomon tapped the wheel, then turned to him. "Because I don't need to prove who I am, and I don't need to yell to be heard." Taryn looked out the window, thinking, "You know how often I've had to choose between letting things slide or blowing up?" Solomon replied, "What happened today wasn't new, but how you respond, that's what defines you." "But they disrespected you. In front of everyone." "They did," Solomon said, "and everyone saw it. But they also saw the truth. They saw 6 men with no obligation stand up, not because I asked, but because they knew what that moment meant." Taryn sat with that. "Son," Solomon said, pulling out a folded photo of Taryn as a baby, cradled by his late mother. "I carried this to Kandahar, through losing your mom, and I brought it here. Not because it makes me strong, but because it reminds me what's worth protecting." Taryn's voice dropped. "You always knew who had your back." "I didn't need to know. I just had faith," Solomon said. "Real men don't vanish when things get hard. They show up, and they stay." A pause. "I want to be like that," Tyrion said. "Like you." "You already are," Solomon answered. "You walked across that stage with your head high. You didn't let anger take your shine. You stood firm, even when the moment tried to pull you under." Outside, the last of the SEALs got into their cars. Creed looked once more toward the Charger. Solomon nodded. No words, just a silent exchange that meant everything. Tyrion leaned back. "So what now?" Solomon turned the key. The engine rumbled to life. "Now we head home. You pick dinner." Tyrion grinned. "Waffle House." Solomon laughed. "Of course." As they drove away, the school disappeared in the rear view, but the memory of what happened inside that gym would linger for everyone who had been there. For Tyrion, it was more than graduation. It was a day he understood that manhood isn't loud. It's in how you carry yourself when nobody's watching. Some people shout to be noticed. Others stay silent and are never forgotten.